Chapter 1865. Have you investigated this person's background? God Lord Flying Feather's expression gradually turned solemn. When it came to a heaven-defying realm existence, he had no choice but to treat this matter seriously. God Lord, I've already sent people to investigate, but I've never heard of anyone in the heaven-defying realm called Yi Xian. Heavenly King Cloudmist stepped forward, bowed and continued. Based on the investigations of our subordinates, this person appeared extremely abruptly. Some people saw him walk out of the desolate ancient graveyard. Am I going to die? And then ever since he was born, of this was the first time Taizong felt so close to death. There was no other useful information. He was suffocating. Walked out of the desolate ancient graveyard. The darkness of death. Could he be someone from the desolate ancient era? Focus. God Lord Flying Feathers of turning the tables in the hands of a heaven-defying five transformations really was a heaven-defying expert at this moment who had survived from the desolate ancient era. He did not hate Yi Xian for causing him to die here. Impossible. Instead, the desolate ancient era has already been destroyed, and no one has survived. Taizong realized that death was not all the heaven-defying he thought it was. There was great terror between life and death. The desolate ancient era has already been destroyed. When he was faced with death, and none of the legendary heaven-defying experts have appeared. Perhaps it was just a different way of living. If someone really did survive, they would be heaven-defying experts, not heaven-defying existences. The four heavenly patriarchs spoke with Taizong's throat with his fingers. After all, the desolate ancient era had been destroyed, and a hint of ruthlessness flashed in his eyes. Even the heaven-defying 9 transformations had vanished. Twisting Only heaven-defying experts of the 9 transformations had been able to survive. Great Yan's sort of person had never appeared. He no longer had any interest in the desolate ancient era. In the next moment, only he would destroy Taizong's body and soul. There had never been a single trace of him in the ancient era. Consciousness was already fading. God when Lord he heard Flying Feather frowned in the face of this clamor and faint and sinister smile no matter where he comes from. Face. Since he has already declared war on my divine dynasty, although he was about to die, God Lord will naturally have to meet him. Growled arrogantly. As God Lord It was just like his personality. Everyone fell silent. He would never lower his head to anyone. Began to settle in. Beg for mercy from Great Yan's a heaven-defying expert of unknown origins. Truly did put a lot of pressure on Chapter 1870. He would rather die than Flying Feather divine dynasty. He raised his hands and since they were down on Taizong Flying Feather. This Taizong loud maniacal bastard was about to reach the heavenly laughter rang through the heavens seriously. When had he ever offended someone like he did not notice the presence of there were people who could veteran at all. At this critical moment, do you have any other flame godly down with regards to why are you shameless destroying our dynasty power surrounding Taizong godly down into the room? And control his anger sudden allowing him to absorb your grandpa prepared calm down. Cultivation was critical backward. Cultivate all your privacy if you know what's the homework that Yi Xian handling all your Taizong's blood because otherwise not even grandpa cultivation divine dynasty however young Taizong let heaven existed in Arizona one had to come out it was He understood the heavenly state of eternal reincarnation. Are you in the heaven song supported out of the terrifying with how giant elder heaven others left as this moment pointed out his finger. It was as if giant chapter of the heaven cold down incarnation of divine dynasty. Everything seemed so powerless in a horse of a heaven punch to destroy the heaven. Everything was going according to our plan. This was the proof that the patriarchs were alive. Ever since the heaven divine down the door to finger at in tight song. The divine light soared into the sky, but it produced I never thought of dynasty and tight song turned not into a deafening sound rang in ears because they were not in the same realm as heaven and earth transitions. Wuxia had just destroyed out of their towering giants. Then they crashed heavily on the ground. And the heaven's divine power, miserable that could destroy the world, he could not be prostrated themselves as long as the 8 great blood gushed out of their towering giants. They were still attack on great instant powers that it was enough cause of giants. Then would have been curious to wipe the ground beneath their fled into the floating and terrifying of heaven and earth. Then he would parle the Lydian dynasty. He looked down at fire the dynasty and tied on all their prostrate. Then it turned into growling flames. As well as the heaven terrifying figure. It should be noted that the fact that God was great this was his attack, whose physical body had just been destroyed by know that could the heaven define out what do we have to talk about? Otherwise, in the shortest time possible, giants that used for wiping out the killing the goose that the heaven divine transformation didn't think however killed even because why didn't blood from the destroyed by the divine dynasty and enough did the stronger divine mass what other Trump really wanted to become stronger this was the difference otherwise both of us had to do with him although there were everyone who was checking the heaven defined this moment that reached cultivation and the heaven defined he didn't care about the lives the difference between them was perhaps the difference still have a chance to survive tight song but he did not want to have a heaven defined he led the faded divine God after all the consequence he was a battle in Greece heaven unfortunately still gave the difference to live them and the gains would not however it'll give us heaven what to anyone who comes to take the heart of why father and kind guests for ingredients as long as you waiting guest of my time hurry up and die wouldn't care even if no matter what gold yellow dollars and coming what the hell are you talking about divine fire song the primordial had to be said that feather come to me lived up to strike even I don't have the master of a divine guidance isn't dead the other legend comes with all the strike heights on suffer back I might even lose my life if you don't hear it now that you're really going to right demeanor would not be double back over Yixian and but Yixian rose and the golden sun shone his own fresh but he forced himself unchanged an ocean in her evil light waiting to die seemed like the experts clear she had already held an expression stood on top of the golden looks like you guys still have a terrifying murderous alone patriarch did not even care about his injury was not afraid of Wuxia withdrew his energy tricks at all, casting heaven and feather transformations as he struggled to the flying feather divine dynasty. Although great Yan's patriarch was strong after he reigned, the divine dynasty was destroyed by wealth from the earth. His body was a great light, terrifying the heavens was dressed in black. Great Yan's patriarchal divine masters had fallen down as he disdained such. He was relying on his extravagant strolled along the grand out of his body, and gathered on four heavens scattered. He charged towards great Yan's patriarch like hundreds laying the so-called Italian types on his body as a medium to stimulate the greatest potential in one's heaven and earth. The grand unexpected of a divine dynasty. As a heaven-defying existence along, he couldn't help but sigh. Person, a divine technique was truly from his extraordinary demeanor. From the mountain with the ways that he had come well as his enemies. However, at this point, the golden clouds that covered no other Yan's patriarch under God and guidance with a flying feather divine dynasty their front branches. There was no nonsense. Their minds were on the terrifying boundless water and the hundreds of millions of miles of territory. The four flying bodies, blood and his generals all bowed bodies down. He turned into an abyss mobile into a matter battlefield. All heaven drifting rusting old brother down. Accompanied by the man's however, he could not have been once had improved my cultivation of the clouds. It had to be done at the depths of the primordial flying feather divine dynasty. There was no fluctuation in dynasties of the current era. He vanished from the naturally had the divine dynasty. However, everyone was for formality the heavens and earth. After all, on the path to the top of that heaven, only by transformation slaughtering unguided even started cursing loudly. Would one be a step by God had a calm with crushed and covering the eternal. It would not take long. However, to be abandoned vital strike at that time abandoned as well. Would not use only by hearkening and wanted to go back years later within the Tao Palace. Divine strength has patriotic as expected. Quite a great Yan's extreme evil strike divine heaven down finally recovered hesitation. This first slammed during great patriarch no longer had heavenly road into the Tao Palace. In the next moment, his song fell from the divine dynasty. Why did he run generals were about to follow? Didn't the great Yan's feathers after launch of an extreme prevent my divine dynasty ran to instantly boom with an axe. There was no need for the heavy and take a move. The grand elder great Yan's patriarch heavenly dynasty were already in tatters. They wanted to see all the great flame divine dynasty. God could not harm vast mountain. However, not even no longer were calm and imposed as before. We've been running for 10 years. And it was all time for us to strike to the death. Everything that had this million times smiled with red. This was a great gathered into a one could only drink outside. But all of great Yan's patriarch fell in the blood. Wuxia might have come along with smells, but he was a heaven-defying man after all. Throat. Any heaven-defying expert could be treated during the successful ancient stretched his own to crush your body had only a look of entitlement to annihilate your soul. The backlash every time also was how frightening. However, blood in his body was erupted from running. There was always a blood song had been violent covering a regular chapter 1860. He also noticed some shabby twisted off. Candles on the other side. And the sun's aura was becoming more and more inexplicable aura shifting the heavens and earth somewhat flying leather. Hundreds also meant that across from down his finally according to the divine lore covering the God flying feather moreover. We have a total of 5 and faster for a million primeval stones. Is this fellow going to break the brim to the heaven handed it for transformation? This tea is not a divine item. Blood. It is merely made from the results of the battle of Taishan and Shah. Fellow Dao, but he only have Wuxia nodded in satisfaction have a teacup more than 5 million primeval stones. The heaven-defying 5 put down the would not even if he joined forces with Taishan, he would still die. Fragrance lingers on my lips in the sky. The original fragrance had never honestly away from even somewhat great after all. The fact that he could only let tell to become one of the high-quality lands. He won't die, right? Although he had a hard not into massacre. Strong would always fellow dynasty the more they fought. Not a single God direction with feather combat was such a burning killing song was for some entire Fei divine trembled turned into a merciless killing song was one against will. This was not the burning could also allow more to continuous from the because only natural even in person none of them would made him feel as this also allowed although great and fellow Dao strands of evil light I hope that fellow Dao and several immemorial divine palpitating aura emanated fellow Dao can also resist flames through master and divine dynasty and the 7 divine generals of extreme confidence in just one instant fellow Dao young Wuxia was not an ancient annihilated God of his universe he vaguely wasted in an very ordinary matter this moment and there was not on his way and there were tens of millions of primal Wuxia's eyes turned today ferocious
it was
line
enough for him to crush the entire time plane.
The major sacrificed one after another.
Great
no
way
stopped the attack
that
Wuxian was filling with joy as he calmly didn't let any of the terrifying creatures terrify was happening. This Wuxian's patience naturally no white fellow died, no matter how small a cultivated feathers said with a faint
even
smile.
so,
Killing
was
an
uncle
in the world
Wuxian
was
was
almost
otherwise
he would
however
not have chased after them felt that it was not understand the meaning of so much fear. Moreover, body was become surprised to discover as though it was the other party had not shown any hostility. This also made as a power he had arrived at having the past tribulation transcend upon otherwise experience. It was originally dangerous. He could tell that it would decline to improve suddenly flickered. These two things like fellow knowledge and not someone causing him to shudder display. Could it be? It wouldn't be that the entire body was going to die. And his expression was so turned gloomy. The great hour was destroyed, killing corpses wherever his eyes. This was also obvious that the other parties would devour touched conservation after the other living had to know that all the idle time and tribulation transcend so-called heaven defying secret that only also may help them see that the other party had at this moment tribulation. Therefore, thought if you really are not a picture of felt threat, you might also change. You must have been lucky enough to survive the tribulation. This is a butterfly could devour their blood. But there's something I would not have was also fellow Taoist he would not have been able to fight against desolation. He was at so how did he not have managed to survive that apocalyptic calamity? Sun could begin and flying feather as most important. Although Wuxian was having a train of feathers was extremely terrifying. Wuxian was even in the future. He knew that his hand overturned to the past as it turned out. He wasn't the other party who brought this. He was afraid how could a person who didn't about to devour my memory now already missing. Had guessed however another that I woke up in the thought that Wuxian something extremely terrifying did not expect that had told him what Wuxian randomly found envious. Otherwise, he could never slay the terror for the first time in eternal universe. Wuxian muttered that he would die in the past. He unleashed this however he would be in great trouble. Having immemorial how it is to return to the great flying feather not by understanding. He did not suspect that they completely submerged tight because at their level and in extremes were terrifying ways all living beings. Everything depended on thinking about this problem. It seems like fellow Taoists does not understand the common goal of this moment. Otherwise, the aura that Tai Tsung emitted had the responsibility to define fire in such a serious manner. God Lord this also meant that he a ray of light flashed into the heavens. Please enlighten me. He instantly understood the crux of the matter. Wuxian finally realized that he had better calculated something. The so-called life and death situation meant that he actually comprehended from God Lord flying and even broke through to the heaven-defying feather let out alongside. Whether they died was not insane. He had his own and responsibility. The result two of them were clearly in the primordial age was destroyed. Wuxian wasn't in the primordial age battle. And one primeval age expert according to the line of thought and became a so-called the past can't be changed. The primeval age Wuxian began to great envy and legends, however, had been lost in the primordial after his jealousy. The eternal universe was the only degree of them became no matter how powerful a living and survived the reincarnation cycle. He was able to cultivate so quickly as long as the primordial he had made of them wasn't changed. If one were to from that terrifying danger of the immemorial fires with the primeval age had a common however, Wuxian frowned that break the curse. He had actually been with Tai Tsung and truly allow the primeval according to this line of thought. For the sake of this attitude was all the heaven had some interaction. Otherwise, it would not have been able to mad cultivated and mad by in their cultivation, changing the past so that brings the most terrifying danger of the immortal world through the universe. Wuxian didn't know what was also Tion's attack. However, but when Tai Tsung entered the cultivation of a heaven fire quality to bear the consequences, this attack was extremely terrifying. Where in order to cause a heaven fire expert stood in the clouds price one had to pay with the world was overturned. His thoughts were absolutely did it for a moment at this moment Tai Tsung transformation but it also required one to have a heaven-shaped appearance and to grow boundless amounts of life and to reduce to ashes. Therefore, every divine dynasty at the present age was oppressing the patriarch below them, and the great sex suppressing the sex. The wariness in his eyes grew stronger. Such a person had achieved a breakthrough layer by layer just to cultivate if he was allowed to continue cultivating. Chapter 8 would definitely die in the future. However, this was far from strong wind in order to allow after entering the fourth transformation below him and break the hundreds of millions of miles of land. The heaven fire expert charged toward great countless courtiers lay on the shocking evil the nine changes divine master. Perhaps there was still hope for been annihilated. Therefore, there was an terrifying in the heaven fire operated in the air. That there causing unimaginable damage to the world within 100 million. However, once there was a fight, evil light covered the fight to the death, and divine fire set in order to cause the 9 chambers. The 2 figures fought from the sky to the ground, mouths of from the ground to the sky. Everything in their blindly cultivated primal seclusion of heaven and power was terrifying. Cultivation could be improved. To put it bluntly, the heaven was in a good mood. Experts of the primeval this was just the beginning. As terrifying explosion rang in the air, and devoured each other's real and in the end, after all, flames around his body were extinguished. There was no it was clear that he was at a disadvantage. Your cultivation is not exchanged for the message of that ultimate. On the other hand, what's your name? This was the responsibility of the primal extremely arrogant voice to die 100 toward the patriarch Yixian's eyes to tremble. Yixian's patriarch he actually didn't feel the aura. However, he did not fight that song again. Who could lead the person's cultivation was about to the curse of the fire age, and the person was still responsibility. Remember this, definitely not below his. And it was also the responsibility turned around. I'll make sure you die. Great feather paused for a moment, great and then he gave in the next moment. He looked at his resentful voice reverberated. You know why we are called heaven? It was clear that he had been secretly in the hopes of the ancient creatures, and only was an evil and only by going against the heavens. Now that he gave off a feeling that he was looking down on heaven and earth, he no longer he was as if he did not care about anyone or anything. We also, however, open the legendary door of however, great Yan's patriarch would never let the two eternal universe. He could only let there was a mischievous and body for a time more days. He finally understood why this person was not old, had not one definitely person torch from their eyes. On the contrary, you had welcomed him to grandpa's youth and even discussed with strange oppression. Cursed loudly. Everything was for the sake of the voice reverberated in the air. Everything was for astonishment of all the living beings. Two of them knew seemed to be in high spirits. At this moment, and his heaven's fire took with arrogance and gradually calmed down. However, in the next moment, there was a complicated look in his eyes. The person standing in front of him out a mouthful was one of the current god dynasty exploited them later by later era, and his face was pale and however the song but it was actually just to create a powerful type song. Even his appearance was more like a after it was all for the sake of the calamity of the world who had been in prison for countless years. At that moment, Xian was finally understood. It was clear that he was also surprised. The living being he was just wondering where heaven divine realms were. It turned out that their goal of cultivation was so right in front of him in the next moment. I know that I won't wrong with you really and why do you keep staring at me? And I also heard that there would be a day when I would die in the hands of someone stronger and his methods or his injuries were not enough for him to fight. You personally witnessed the birth of someone stronger than me. This also proves that I didn't live in vain. Song slowly walked towards Yixian as he sized him up with an evil gaze. The pot of tea turned into ashes. A chapter of brilliant immemorial divine light. At this moment, the repercussions were finally showing. Rumbled and Tidesong was indifferent. Now it's a battle of life and death between you and me. Fortunately, if you win, Tidesong managed to scare Yan's the heavens and the earth. Otherwise, when both of them were evil light that connected the heavens, all heaven's cosmos started to tremble and that terrifying might of his heaven-defying in his current situation wasn't any better than Tidesong. Yixian was remember my name. He looked at otherwise later. If he fainted, didn't say anything for a long time. Who knew what before this and become the Yixian still had the idea of killing Yixian so presumptuous in cultivation god dynasty and rose into the sky. Grand Tiger shouted angrily. He was only doing a beam of light with a mere heaven-defying transformation. The other heaven-defying realm Tidesong had turned cold. At this moment, they are doing it for Yixian was too weak from his 5 fingers. He had forced himself to use the glimmer of his cultivation. In front of such righteousness, his body and soul was heart trembled. Yixian's however feeling had out from his soul away from this maybe desolation has the same thoughts too. Otherwise, at that moment, great Yan's patriarch felt a little self-doubt. In the next moment, would be doomed. He never understood why desolation flying. Yixian carried Tidesong to heaven defying path as he transformed into a streak of light. Perhaps he understood a little attack. I have otherwise already grand elder would have died at our slowly with heading. He became there was only one thought in his mind. He didn't have heaven that was realm from as far away as possible. This was also his respectful fate. Now be ordinary. And the night was when he was in the heaven-defying 9 transformation that the 9 changes on his back his heavenly curse of the world and this consciousness was already muddled and he didn't know how far he descended. Flying feather held him terrifying. He didn't know how not hold on even long Tide's question. His injuries only in the heaven wasn't certain to the point that one day no longer bear that battle really switched the nine in the next moment. Something an ordinary terrifying powerlessly fell from the sky, and the two of them were like falling meteors. You actually managed to block my attack. Upon seeing God again, sound of feathers confused appearance. Song's evil aura shot out muffled crash. His dark eyes shone with crashed into the ground. Terrifying, however, there were both around no longer feel pain. He seemed to have turned into as unconscious as the dead. After an unknown period of time, a beautiful figure shot across the sky. It was as though the sound of the two people crashing to the ground had alerted him of terrorists. Her flawless eyes were fading away. His divine ability was terrifying and even the most powerful moreover could not stop it. It was fine if he didn't make a move. The young girl the moment he made a move, as she moved her right hand, a faint holy light glinted of sorrow. He was about to this also caused life. Even if the nine transformations shocking was also someone who walked out of his own path. His heaven burial art was also crazy acts feather smiled and the terrifying power of reincarnation. When these words and felt as if his soul was trembling with the eternal extreme pain of being torn apart. This was because he was locked in a fierce battle, making him want to scream out loud. This was not just flying feathers was an extreme pain, but the will of all the heaven divine energy poured into his soul. Constantly looking down at the heaven and allowing the earth with an evil aura to gradually recover. A terrifying Shien's eyelids trembled slightly. Immemorial divine light. In this heaven-defying battle, Flying Feather's entire body erupted with heaven-defying steadily. It was terrifying. He was trying his best some kind of secrets because he felt to warm his combat power. This battle was not ending until one of them cool energy just now also was also a bit able to survive. However, Yixin asked Xian to feel that the owner of this moment had no longer had any of his made him feel slightly relieved. His eternal dream. He tried his heavenly calamity transformation and wake himself up from his coma. After all, finally, Flying Feather was worthy someone who would spoil children. His consciousness was also gradually recovering. The other party's cultivation and battle power was reflected in his eyes. Entire body. What kind of smile was the power of the heaven? The moment otherwise opened, if he died at the halos of consciousness was in a trance, he would really fail miserably because he had never seen such a forbidden secret smile like a volcano. It even made his cold and Yixian's aura also brightly warm. His entire body disappeared into the void time. Completely the two of them let out high-bliss of roars as their healing heart calmed down. It was as if the owner of this voice had a magical power to calm the flying feather divine. Finally, the might of the turbid eyes heaven-defying expert, a young girl's face appeared in his eyes. One had to know that ever silence of the holy Yixian no one was his match. It's her. The two of them rose just by and clashed with each other, and no one was able to survive. Beams of heaven-defying also made him arrogantly think this had only seen the power and it was unforgettable, as well as the flash of life in the young girl who was buried in the ancient bronze battle erupted. However, before heavenly Yixian could have believed that the person's perception in the battle, regardless of cultivation, flying secret techniques, had gone down. Life and death crisis in front of him was definitely the figure appeared in front of them. Yixian was preventing them from joining the battle. He didn't expect this is a battle destined for God Lord, and under such no one is allowed to interfere. Also struck back. The newcomer was allowed to be elder. The mountain had white Yixian's and a white beard, and his body trembled. Battle between Yixian and terrifying power that erupted. His voice ringing out in everyone's ears. In order to confirm his thoughts, the four heavenly kings and 12 divine generals glanced at each other. What about they truly couldn't understand why the Grand Elder was stopping them now that a powerful foe was attacking. And comforted him to lie quietly on the bed. The Grand Elder was a heaven-defying 1875 forehead. At this moment, healing his damaged divine soul, if he was willing to join the dynasty far away, finally the battle between the two had quietly on the bed. But his eyes never left him to fight alone. This makes all the destiny of heaven. She didn't know why you're powerful. Staring at her, we heard my name is even stronger. Heavenly King Yimon. Once you step into the heaven-defying realm, so many you will naturally understand what I am saying today. That's a very bold man to fight on par with the divine master. There was a great Xian had just opened his mouth when he realized that his secret was only known by those extremely complicated. How are the kids injured? Xian died in the hands of beings. His injuries are much more serious than yours. And the Grand Elder's words made everyone was boundless and the clouds were shattered. But since they had not been heaven to find don't worry. They knew that their grandfather was handed away from Yixian's. At this moment, they were most concerned about the outcome of this battle. He had not been an opponent. Dermot looked par with him martial demon body. At this moment, the heavens and the earth pressed him in the entire universe. He seemed to be towering stronger as manifested. Her pure little face, when their fists and palms were lighting. A might that could suppress was really angry. Times erupted. Although he knew his opponent's identity, in the world was turned into ashes under the bombardment of the shattering expert in the future. Whether it was intentional or not, have interacted the battle in a daze and murmured. However, finally understood not why him a grandfather always by Xiao's side, allowing it to exist peacefully. Such a did not teach a lesson. Your divine ability truly astonishing. It is impossible to control oneself. Your cultivation is such a pure and flawless mind, and the ground would make someone as evil as stars fall from immemorial stars. 7 days fell horribly. A total of 7 days to shower that under the meticulous care of this battle was too terrifying. His body was the two of them were almost on par with each other. He was already able to cultivate on his own anything and begin to recover his damaged soul and stronger as the transformation was about trouble. Was not 7 days had passed as the battle ended. There were still no signs of his fighting power. However, terrifying. Under the battle went on for divine ability. Taisong's face had regained a lot of were injured. Exerted proof that no condition was improving. Let alone killing during the 7 days. Supreme and all didn't chat too much. You are an opponent worthy of respect. But carefully observed this legendary woman. The two of them were facing each other in the air, reincarnation racing wild beings of the primordial era. While great dream of a legendary goddess exhaustion, those who saw her could not bear to hear her. This grandson of yours did not hold back at all. She was not beautiful. She did not have a stunning appearance. A hint of appreciation in his eyes. Pure and flawless eyes did not know that people would never forget for the rest of their lives. In a situation where Yi Xian was greater than his opponent, made her and die for not hold back towards Yi Xian. Nor did he want to. I advise you to shout battle for advancement. Otherwise, only the strong will survive until all this time. Yi Xian originally didn't want to. The band had to kill his opponent. Young song. Only then he was really forced his way forward over the corpses. He was also burning with experts. Come. Yi Xian respected this opponent with a cheap mouth, but he also had to kill him. Another 3,000 rounds. A moment of soft-heartedness. Boom. Chapter stumbling Xian's body was like the heavens and the earth. Like a thunderclap of the world. Xiao was so heaven-defying that she looked at him blankly. Yi Xian did not think about these strange expression on his face. He only didn't know what kind of interest this time was going to happen in his faded in order to reach a higher realm. Energy. Xiao Spirit had waved her hand in front of Tai Song. He didn't subdue Tai Song that there was no danger now. Xian understood pressed her small hand between his eyebrows to Grandpa Tai Song is afraid of Albert. Boom! Swish! The ancient sunlight could not dim down flying feather, even after a large concerned expression savagely roared in his forehead flashing as a originally violent fight was even more intense. Stiffened. Blood continuously rained down from the sky. Eternal dream. All right. Yi Xian activated all his techniques and crazily attacked as well as all the forbidden all kinds of secret proficient. She was deeply afraid that this man as body was using the heaven iron were unable to determine look to the side, causing indeed a place smile of shout the heavens in the future. This was really a fated meeting. Dao grew at this moment. Metal flashed as you unveiled with the woman through the fight. There was no room for anyone else. Swung with heaven-punching halberd at Scottish yelling feathers. His heart him back violently. Tai Song was terrifying halberd never felt now a serious to be honest his life. Yi Xian was designed with feather destined art. Although perhaps it was the god-lord flying feather, the moment he saw Xian knew that he was still weaker than the girl in front of him. The difference was in their techniques and Dao. He finally, although his very heaven's technique, the moment he met her, unleashing all the techniques stars and Dao in the battle of life, the world sang Peach Blossom every single one of the heaven-defying because Yi Xian's combat experience was a peerless rich. Cough, experienced Yi Xian life and done battle feather away at times full power. It was his voice that young Xian could fly with Albert. In terms of activation base and combat expression on Tai feathers heavily almost shocks the world to the ground. And the immemorial divine light Xian's combat experience made up for this, turning him into the most resplendent. Yi Xian was gradually suppressing Yi Xian was like a light feather. This brat's magic and terrifying very powerful. Exploded from magic of love, turning into billions of Xian every time experienced the great knowledgeable Xian and had abandoned a lot of heaven-defying technique. Yi Xian was different someone who every single one of the heaven feathers could not possibly horn from an antelope because only one of because of a woman. Every single bit survived to be dumbfounded. This was the law of survival in no waste at all. What's your name? As the battle went on, heaven gradually realized the problem. Yi Xian's flying body suddenly stopped. Song. He was heaven-destroying halberd in his hand. Tai Song's voice was as soft as a mosquito. After the terrifying power of Xian neared his neck, heaven burial his body quickly opened up a safe distance from Yi Xian. At a loss for what to do. Then, Clearly, he was extremely nervous in front of the girl he liked. Yi Xian's entire body seemed to have turned into a vortex. Hui, Tai Song immediately noted the incarnated to destroy all things in the world. Cultivation level of reincarnation. You are beneath me, of the woman beside flying feather. You have more combat vulgarities than me. But when you saw I cultivate for a period of time, you turn into a I will definitely chop off your head and use it as a urinal. Alas, he was no longer able to stop venomous with his words. This was a life sentence arrogant and rude as ever would die. Even though he knew Xian would die, match for there was no way he must stay away from him. Heaven and earth is full of heaven-bearing reincarnation. Don't fall into his trap. Boom. Man and Halberd as one, transforming into samsara. At this moment, it was such a venomous fellow. Xian had tricked him. Was someone almost knew his life. He could not kill brother Tai Song had taken place in his body. Although you and I felt wanted to kill his extremely it was not that he had no heaven-defying force of transformation. Still had a trump card. Life and death. It was the desolate heaven he transformed into a vortex door. Although it was not the mysterious power of samsara, he no longer wanted to from combining them was enough. Lord Xian killed him. Swish. However, he flashed a light illuminated the entire universe, still considered so painful that all living things could barely finally calm down. But there was no apocalyptic scene. You should quickly recover from your terrifying energy. Xiao said this moment. Oh, don't worry. Upon hearing these minor injuries are nothing to me. Song was clearly just that two figures crossed each other expression and then came to a stop in the sky. This was because Song wanted to stand up. Some words were not without the members of the flying feather dynasty. However, still had a killer move that he had yet. They did not know what the result of this battle recovered from your injuries. And they certainly did not wish that Xian was not also. If you're willing, you can call me Xiao. As the future primordial heritage, I'll call you Xiao from now on. Tai Song was a completely bloody person in front of Xiao. His face was shameful with tender white bones. If I were even the way he spoke immediately caused the members of the flying feather scoundrel face. He didn't know what to say. This was something that the two of them were fated to meet. He could not imagine that the young Tai Song God's scoundrel. Don't be so sarcastic. A bloody hole appeared in Xian's face turned red when he very simple as you want me to leave. His shining eyes golden half of black wand stones you snatched. And his sorrowful smile appeared on his lips. Without a word. Xian wasn't interested in Xiao's lips. After all, the shameless already knew what would happen in the future. And then there was something that was destined to happen. Large amounts of flesh realized that his goal for appearing and the ancient divine light around him began to crumble. He began to heal his injuries. The members of the Flying Feather Dynasty held in grief. Through to the four heaven to the sky and arrived at God Lord Flying Feather's side. He didn't have Tai Song's talent. The Grand Elder so he could only rely on Feather's collapsing body. Moreover, a hint of sorrow and desolation to the primordial age. No wonder Tai really are stronger than me. He was here for the heaven and earth vitality day after day. The Grand Judging by his appearance, his body was bathed in the blink of an eye, and he was during an extremely wretched state. Unfortunately, blood was he had number of his primordial divine items, but it was still smiled at crack. He had long recovered from all his injuries. Go and return to his peak state. Why should I lightly wipe my way? The blood also recovered from his injuries. His face not yet successfully stepped into the four heaven-defying relationship with him in the future. In terms of cultivation, that the final fatal blow of he wouldn't be able to take away. However, unimaginable 10 years, Tai Song didn't focus on still have a long way to go. Cultivation. He stayed by Xiao's side almost every day. There was no shadow for discussion around. I did not die after 10 years of knowing each other. Flying feather laughed in desolation. I don't believe his body gradually began to turn illusory. When the ancient evil king began to rise from his feet, he was truly evil and shameless. It was clear that he was about to be obliterated. This caused Xian to be extremely speechless. This girl looked for the God Lord, but her cultivation wasn't flying feather angrily roared. The heaven-defying transformation, letting this guy follow him was really flying feather at the heaven-defying unbearable grief. This guy did not care about his killing. He wasn't fighting revenge. Moreover, if he waited cultivation to destroy the great downward power God general flying feather, however, after only half of his body remained, secretly give him a fatal blow. Stared at the members of the Xian was also an old fox. It could be said that they hit it off on first sight. After all, he was still no match for this doubt that the three of them cultivated 7-year-old revenge against top technique. At this moment from today, he is the new master of the Flying Feather Dynasty. Questions about all of you must obey his decrees. He did have a childlike mentality. Flying Feather roared. Everyone was taken aback as he predicted no why God Lord Flying Feather had originally this fellow was and put away your weapon willing to do so. The decree of the God Lord. He decided to use this Grand Elder primordial. He was a heaven fire. Moreover, I can't win according to what the mission of a half vitality, and he also understood God Xian pretended to be helpless. Sworn siblings. He took out half of the vitality stones. Xian didn't know what would happen in the future. And Taitsong had always been wary of Yixian. Taitsong was after all. He didn't think that only grand Godlord flying feather caused him a lot of trouble. The other guy wasn't afraid of him. The flying feather couldn't do anything to him. I hope, however, he was a little heaven-shaken under Xiao's suggestion. Only then the other guy refused at all and find an opportunity to snatch the glue stones. And God thought about it, and Taitsong had never imagined that Yixian would actually compromise him, didn't die, and actually give him half of the primordial stones. The three of them became sworn siblings. Surprised him. Naturally. At least you know what's good for you. Brother. We'll meet again if fate wills it. And he kept arguing since the number of primordial sacrificing oneself that he reluctantly realized that there were millions of evil. Big brother. He didn't want to fake brother Jerry Heaven died. He put away brother Taitsong suddenly felt that there was no addressed the two of them. Good and evil. He was already facing suppressed millions. However, Yixian's things weren't that easy. And all those who did not how could Yixian let him go so easily? Brother Taitsong, vicious and cruel. Please wait for a moment. However, the reason he did this was only to make himself stronger, to advance on the path of shocking changes in the nine heavens. Perhaps Fei Yu wanted to ascend to the nine heavens himself. Yixian took a step forward and looked in the face of the continuation of the archaic world. At this moment, go back on your word, the curse of reincarnation has heaven defined. It was not only the arcane and evil light burst out. Only one step away from breaking all the heavens of the heaven individuals in the archaic world had this same was not a person. They slaughtered millions to others and fought to the death. There was no great enmity between the heaven back on my individuals. They were only advancing himself fall behind stepping on the bones of those around them. Also Taitsong's reincarnation arrived. Because Brother Taitsong's so-called shattering grudges were no longer the great flame divine dynasty speed was on par with his thoughts were absent. Then he would have a high chance of however the great flame divine lord's cultivation and he gradually understood the so-called responsibility. Perhaps today's battle was filled with helpless because he knew that the nine heavens shocked with them each other for a long time. Taitsong would curse I really want to be friends with you, and that was why he chose Brother Taitsong. He compromised on the path of Yixian and attacked the great flame divine always by after we kill the great flame divine lord. Come here today. We can take all the origin stones of heaven and earth. Suddenly felt he liked me or not. He had always treated Long as another person. Wouldn't that be wonderful? But when he saw Yixian's expression was sincere. Heaven and earth suddenly Taitsong was that no matter if it was Yixian addressed him as a brother, they were all just asking this question. He showed Yixian's burden of eternity. He did not understand why Yixian would give him the eternal universe. It's pointless to ask for the sake of bringing to ask you for something. This explains why he was willing to do the half, not that great. Yixian pretended not to know. However, Taitsong did not know what Taitsong was taught. Not a single heaven-defying individual the great flame divine lord's cultivation destroy the great dynasty. Also, to break divine master, there's a terrifying origin in the great becoming divine dynasty above the eternal universe. We have to think about this. Humans were all going back on your word now. Brother Taitsong said Yixian always believed in this. That's what you're talking about. However, Yixian pretended to be enlightened. Every single culture in the Taitsong with a puzzled expression pretended to mock Taitsong. I didn't promise you that individual about to destroy the great Yin dynasty. Then he turned around and destroyed the master is still advancing with great smile appeared on his face, stepping on the bones of other almost killed us in the divine lord. Yixian was definitely a black elite from the great Yin dynasty. Taitsong, how am I supposed to also symbolize that Yixian had officially become the master of Yixian would never admit it, even if in the face of Yixian's mockery. When an expert was delusional to think that the primal stones the arrogance in his bones was stimulated by Yixian's origin stones. You think I'm afraid of the great flame divine dynasty? I would never give Taitsong even half our divine master. Let's go together. Let's take advantage of destroy their divine dynasty from the origin. We'll take all their origin stones. Divine general flying cloud angrily first. Terrifying Yixian acted like it around his body. Wasn't afraid of heaven and water. That his relationship with someone separate ways if he didn't have some caught up with Yixian in large pride. If it had been in the past, arrogance came from his mouth as the new divine Taitsong. You're indeed a man of character. Yixian raised his 5 fingers and condensed an enormous starry sky to the extreme. That terrifying heaven-defying might explode out and blasted divine general Fei Yin into the sky. Naturally, he couldn't attack anyone else who was not convinced. Moreover, he had to lower his eyes sinister when he was under someone else's roof. His merciless and fierce gaze caused everyone's expression to change, so he could only control the anger in a breath of cold air. He smiled apologetically and said, "Merciless and wearied heaven, if he wanted to kill, he would kill without any nonsense. As you can see, This was
Xiao
the
is
attitude
currently
that
at the
Yi Xian
peak of the
displayed.
heaven-defying
Yi
third
Xian was not an
transformation.
indecisive
She
person.
needs a lot of
Although
origin
he
stones
admired
to break
Feiyu's
through.
righteousness,
You're doing this
it did
for
not
her?
mean that he
Yi
would
Xian
treat
suddenly
Feiyu's
understood.
subordinates well.
No wonder
Since he was
Taizong
going
was
to
taking
take over
him so
Feiyu
humbly.
Divine Dynasty,
It seemed that
and
this
become
future
the new master
primordial
of
evil
Feiyu
king
Divine Dynasty,
was really willing to
he
bend
had to
his
kill
spine
all those who were not
when he fell in
convinced.
love with a girl.
He could not let them live.
No.
And
In
leave
the next
behind
moment,
any hidden dangers.
Yi Xian rejected
without
him
a doubt,
without hesitation.
The strong were all
Stop
ruthless.
joking.
Even
A
if it
general's
was
success
Xiao, he
was
couldn't
built
do
on
it.
the bones of
He had
10,000.
prepared these origin
This
stones for
sentence had an
himself.
extremely deep
He would never
meaning.
give them away
If a
so
person was
generously.
not ruthless enough,
10 million.
they would not be
10
able to
million
achieve
origin
great
stones
things.
it is. Yi Xian
Taizong
understood
gnashed
this
his
principle
teeth in
very
anger.
well,
But he
this
couldn't
was
do
also
anything
the
to
reason
Yi
why
Xian.
he could cultivate
He could only
to the
plead
heaven
with
defying
Yi Xian
realm.
in a negotiating
Feiyu
tone.
Divine Dynasty was a vast land
Yi
with
Xian
abundant
rejected
resources.
him without hesitation.
He wanted to use
then
all the
sneered and
cultivation
said,
resources
"If you
in
really
the current
like her so
Divine
much,
Dynasty,
why
to
don't you go
improve
out and
himself
snatch her?
rapidly."
Why are
But
you
before
asking
that,
me for origin
he wanted
stones?
to completely control
You,
Feiyu
Taizong
Divine
growled
Dynasty.
hatefully.
If
He
anyone
was so
dared to
angry that he
disobey
couldn't
him or
speak.
disobey him,
Do you know what you've
then
become?
the best solution
You're
was
just
to
like a
kill them.
bootlicker. Why aren't
Yi
you
Xian
paying
said
your
with a
respects
frown.
to the divine master? The great
Taizong
elder
didn't
scolded the others
understand.
coldly.
This was the
because
first time
only
he had
could
heard this
understand
term,
Yi Xian's intention.
so he couldn't understand
as a
what it
heaven-defying
meant.
realm.
However, he
Everything
knew that
was
it was
for
for the sake
definitely
of
not a
becoming
good
stronger.
Bootlicker,
We pay our respects
bootlicker,
to the
you'll have
divine
nothing.
master.
Although
The
you
four
like
heavenly
little sister
kings
Xiao very
and the
much,
7 divine
if you blindly
generals were
flatter
kneeling
her,
at the
you're
feet of Yi
ending.
Xian.
Yi Xian
Regardless
paused.
of whether they
He knew
hated
that
Yi
he couldn't
Xian or not.
continue.
He
In the
just
face
let out
of
a long
absolute
sigh.
power.
If
They
you
could
like
only
someone,
choose to bow
shouldn't
their
you treat
heads
her
and
well?
submit.
I
Taizong
don't want to
said
talk
coldly.
nonsense.
Then you have to
Since
see
I
if
am
she
the
likes
master
you or
of
not.
Feiyu Divine
Yi
Dynasty,
Xian didn't want to
from
argue
now
with
on,
Taizong.
I will have the final
However,
say in
he
this
couldn't
hundreds
stand
of millions
Taizong's
of miles of
bootlicker
territory.
The
How do you
rules
know
set
she
by
doesn't like
Feiyu will
me?
also have to be
Taizong
changed.
said angrily.
Yi Xian
Sigh.
said coldly.
Yi Xian sighed.
He took a step
He
forward
didn't want to persuade
and returned to
Taizong
Feiyu Divine
because
Dynasty.
everything was destined to happen.
Perhaps the reason Taizong was able to become the primeval
Everyone
fiend
looked
monarch
at each other
was
with
because
worry
of
in their
Xiao.
eyes.
They did
Scram.
not know what this
Don't
new
disturb
divine
my
master was
cultivation.
going to do.
Yi
The
Xian
change
waved
of
his hand
master of
impatiently.
Feiyu Divine Dynasty
If you don't give me
was an
origin stones
earth-shattering
today,
event.
I won't go
This
anywhere.
news quickly spread in all
Taizong said
directions
shamelessly,
and made
Big
many
brother,
masters of
second
Feiyu
brother,
Divine Dynasty
what are
know
you
about
talking
it.
about?
However,
Just as the
Feiyu's
two were in a
death did
deadlock,
not cause a huge
Xiao
uproar.
walked into the bamboo
Because in the
forest
Archean
and
world,
saw their red
life
faces.
and death battles
She
between
thought they were
Archean
quarreling
living
again.
beings were happening
Little
all the time.
sister,
It
your
was second
second
rare
brother
for a
wants 10
heaven-defying
million
realm
origin
to fall.
stones.
This
To
also
help you
proves
reach
that
the
the
heaven-defying
emergence of a
fourth
stronger
transformation.
heaven-defying realm
What do you
expert
think?
would only
Yi
bring
Xian
pressure
pretended
and
to sigh.
danger to other
Second
heaven-defying
brother,
realm experts.
I've already told you that my
Prompting them to
cultivation is
cultivate
natural.
crazily to improve themselves. Heaven and earth were heartless and treated all living beings like straw dogs. I really
In
don't
the
need
eternal
origin
universe,
stones.
all
Don't
living
make
beings
things
were
difficult for
domesticated
Big Brother
pigs
next
and
time.
dogs.
They would
Xiao
be
came to
slaughtered when the
Taizong
world
sighed
was
angrily.
destroyed. But
All the heaven-defying
Taizong
realm
glared at Yi
experts
Xian.
understood this
He knew that
principle.
Yi Xian was
This was
using
also one
Xiao
of the
to restrict
reasons
him
why
again.
they cultivated
Big brother,
crazily
second brother
and wanted
look.
to break the eternal
Boom.
curse.
Xiao had
Therefore,
a smile on her
the
face.
entire Archean
With a
world
shake of her
formed an
body,
extremely
she
cruel model.
transformed.
Most
An
of the
extremely
heaven-defying
powerful
realm
realm
experts
experts
established
causing
Feiyu
the
Divine
bamboo
Dynasty
forest to distort
with this
and
as the
disappear.
foundation.
They
Heaven-defying
crazily
fourth
exploited the
transformation.
living beings
This,
in their territory.
sensing Xiao's aura,
Constantly
Yi
plunging
Xian
heaven and
gasped.
earth
He
vitality
was really
stones.
shocked.
And
He
all
couldn't
kinds of great
understand when she had
opportunities.
broken through
Of
to the
course,
heaven-defying
there were
fourth
also very
transformation.
terrifying
He
heaven-defying
hadn't
realm
noticed at all.
experts.
Ha
They did not
Xiao,
establish
you're really
Feiyu
amazing.
Divine Dynasty.
In the next
but
moment,
became terrifying
Taizong
plunderers.
laughed wildly.
Wherever
and
they
looked
went,
at Yi Xian
they would
mockingly.
massacre the
It was as
entire
if he was
sect
telling
and
Yi
plunder
Xian
everything
that
they
even
could
without
to
his
strengthen
origin
themselves.
stones,
Feiyu
Xiao
Divine
had
broken
palace.
through to the
Yi Xian
heaven-defying
sat cross-legged in the void
on her own.
The palace
At
was
this
full of
moment,
kneeling figures.
Yi Xian's face
The
was a
atmosphere
little
was
red.
heavy.
Even if he was
Even the people
thick-skinned,
of Feiyu Divine
couldn't help but
Dynasty
feel
were
careful
careful
to
at
breathe.
this moment.
Where is the
Among
grand
the
elder?
three of them,
Yi
he was
Xian
the
asked
eldest.
faintly.
But
His
his
cultivation was
What
behind the other
instructions do
two.
you have, Divine
Yi Xian
Master?
could only sigh and
The
sigh.
Grand Elder bowed
Comparisons
and
were
waited for
odious.
Yi Xian's orders.
As expected of the two
rules
great
set by
forbidden
Fei
lands,
need to be changed.
breaking through to
Every
the next
100,000
realm was as
years,
easy as eating
the
and
eight
drinking.
sects have to hand
However,
over
he had to
1,000,000
cultivate
heaven
day and
earth
night.
vitality stones.
This made Yi Xian a
We
little
need to
jealous.
change it, Yi Xian said faintly. As Yi Xian's words fell, the people of Feiyu Divine Dynasty were shocked. The Grand Elder asked hesitantly, Divine Master, you mean? Chapter 1888. You guys chat. I'm going into seclusion. Chapter
Yi Xian took a
1871.
step forward,
Paying a
and
tribute
disappeared
of
into
1
the
million
bamboo
origin
forest.
stones
He
every
swore to
100,000
himself
years
that he
is
wouldn't
too
come
little.
out until
This
he
number
reached
needs
the
to
fourth
be increased by 10
transformation.
times.
What's wrong
Prepare
with Big
a decree
Brother?
and inform them.
Xia watched
Yi
Yi
Xian
Xian
said,
leave in confusion.
10 times. What
The
else
great
can
elder's
he do?
expression
He's just
changed
jealous of
greatly.
our talents.
Even the four
Taizong
heavenly
teased.
kings,
That
and the
won't
7
happen.
divine generals
Big Brother
trembled
has always given
as they
me
looked
an
at Yi Xian
unfathomable
with
feeling.
astonishment in
His
their
potential
eyes.
should be above
Black-hearted
yours
and mine.
This was
I'm
truly
afraid
too
the reason
black-hearted.
he hasn't
1
broken
million
through to the
origin
heaven
stones
defying
was no
force
small number.
transformation.
The
Has
8
something
great
to
sects
do
were
with
all
his Dharma
complaining,
access,
but they did not dare to resist because
his
of
potential
God
is
Lord
higher than
Flying
ours.
Feather's
No
cultivation.
way.
But
Now,
now,
Song said in
Yi
surprise,
Xian wanted to increase
Xiao
this
can't
number
be
by
wrong.
10 times.
I cultivate
This
the
was
floating
10
life
million
vanishing
origin stones.
technique.
Was
Big
this not
Brother always
black-hearted
gives
to
me
the
a feeling
extreme,
that he's not
squeezing
real.
the 8
But I
great
can't
sects
tell
to the
what it
limit?
is.
Divine
But his
Lord,
aura
please
is very
understand.
interesting.
10
Not
million
only
yuan
does it have the
stones
aura of
is
the
no
desolate
different
era,
from killing the
but it
goose
also
that
has
lays
the
the
aura
golden
of the
eggs.
immemorial era.
Even when Divine
There's
Lord
also a
Flying
technique
Feather was
endowed that I
overseeing
can't
the
define
divine
dynasty.
Xiao
He had
murmured.
never issued
Her
such
eyes
a
were full of
decree.
curiosity.
If he truly issued
In fact,
such
there
a
was
decree,
one thing she didn't
I'm
say.
afraid that the great
Although the
churches
3 of
in
them
the
have become
surroundings
sworn
would rebel.
siblings.
Please
Yi Xian
reconsider.
had rarely
The
spoken
Grand
to her
Elder
in the
said to
past
Yi
10
Xian
years.
as he bowed.
He had
If
always
he really
kept a
did as Yi
distance from
Xian
her.
said,
So
the 8
she was
great
really
sects
curious
would
about
instantly
Yi Xian.
explode. She
And
didn't know why
millions
Yi
of miles
Xian
of
would reject her,
territory
would be
Of
thrown
course,
into
this
turmoil.
was just what she thought.
This would force the
She
8
didn't
great
tell
sects
Tai
and their
Tsung,
subordinate
but as a
sects
woman,
to rebel.
her
And the
curiosity
Flying Feather
made her
dynasty
want to know more
would
about
probably
Yi Xian.
experience a
Perhaps
terrifying
Yi Xian
upheaval
hadn't
as well.
expected this.
Rebel?
As for Yi Xian,
Yi Xian
he
coldly
didn't think
laughed.
too much about
And then
Xiao.
he rose from the
His
void
rejection
and said,
was just because
Flying
he saw the
Feather is too
future.
benevolent.
Spending too
Which is
much
why
time
he's
with
allowing
her would
these
only
ants
make
to
him
do
more
as they
upset.
please.
Tai
If
Chu is
anyone
going to
really
reincarnate
dares to
and
rebel,
disappear,
then I'll wipe out their
Tai Tsung
entire
was going to
sect.
be trapped in the
With a
land
wave
of
of his
origin
sleeve,
forever.
Yi Xian
Xiao was
vanished
going
from
to fall
everyone's
into
sight.
an eternal
The
sleep.
Grand Elder
In the
and the
future,
others frowned.
the fate of the
They
3
did not
great
think
Archean
that Yi
Earths would
Xian
not
would
be
be
good.
so cruel.
If he invested
and
too
completely
much emotion
disregard
in
the
them,
consequences,
it would be a big problem.
Grand Elder, what
However,
do we do?
there were some
The 4
things that
heavenly
couldn't be
kings
avoided
and 7
just by
divine
resisting.
generals were worried.
In the dark,
and they
Yi
could only
Xian
look
had an
at the
aura
Grand
that
Elder.
attracted Xiao.
After all,
This also
the
caused
Grand
the
Elder
girl
was
to
a
be filled with
heaven-defying
interest in him.
existence.
Perhaps
If the
it would
Grand
evolve
Elder
led
led
them
them
to
to
rebel
rebel
against Yi
against
Xian.
didn't want to see.
They would naturally
Don't
follow.
forget.
What else
Huang
can
was
we
Yi
do?
Xian.
Let's
Yi
do as the
Xian was
Divine
Huang.
Master says.
These two were the same
The first
person to
elder
begin
sighed
with.
as a strange
Just
look
that
flashed
Huang was
across
Yi
his
Xian's
eyes.
previous life.
Grand Elder,
But in the end,
you have
the
to
two
consider
weren't
this
that different.
carefully. If
Closed
you really
door
issue this
cultivation.
decree, only when
The
he
8
break
great
through
sects
to the
will
heaven
definitely
defying
rebel,
forth
and the
transformation
countless sects
could
will
he come
fall
out
into
of
chaos.
seclusion.
Our
In a
feather
quiet
divine
cave,
dynasty
it
will
was
also
pitch
fall
black
without any light.
Heavenly King
Yi
Yinlan
Xian
said
had
anxiously,
completely sealed
Great
himself
Elder,
off,
let's rebel.
and only the power
Divine
of
Lord was killed
reincarnation
by him.
surrounded his
Now,
body.
only
9
you have the
transformations
cultivation of the
shocking the heaven-defying
was Yi
realm.
Xian's goal.
If this person
He
is in charge
absolutely
of the
wouldn't
divine
allow himself
dynasty,
to be inferior
how can
to
we
others.
survive? Nor did he
Heavenly
want to see
King
Tai
Huyen
Tsung mock
roared,
and ridicule
rebelling.
him. The Great Elder smiled bitterly. He looked at the people in front of him and said, Even Feiyu died in his hands. Tai Tsung's mouth was truly too despicable. He was the most despicable person Yi Xian had ever seen. How can I, even someone as shrewd as Yi Xian, into the first heaven-defying transformation, be a match for him? Poisonous. The Great Elder
no
paused
matter
for
how
a
hard he
moment.
tried,
His eyes were
couldn't
deep
connect
and
the
deep.
young Tai
He
Tsung
said,
with the future Tsung.
Moreover, the
You
future
don't
Tsung was
understand the
cold and
responsibility
arrogant.
of the
His
heaven-defying
cultivation
realm.
was shocking.
He's only doing
If Yi
this to
Xian hadn't
strengthen
seen it with
himself.
his own eyes,
It's a good
he
thing
wouldn't
for
have
the Feather
believed that
Divine
the two were the
Dynasty.
same person.
You should
That
know
why
that
Yi
the
Xian
other
slowly
divine
exhaled
dynasties are
and
afraid of
began
us
to calm down
because of the
he was
existence
preparing
of the
to break
second
through
heaven-defying
heaven-defying
transformation.
If we really rebel,
that why Yi
who will
Xian
stop
rolled up
the other
his
divine
sleeves,
dynasties
and a
from
mountain
invading
of
us?
primordial stones
Don't
filled the
forget that
cave.
his cultivation
Rich
is higher
primordial
than
chi
Feiyu's.
immediately surged
He
out
can kill all of
and
us by
gathered into a
himself.
sea of
Don't
primordial
talk about
chi.
rebelling
Let's
anymore.
begin.
Just follow
Yi
his
Xian
orders.
focused his mind.
The Great Elder
and
sighed
prepared
and
to
walked
break
away.
through to the 4
The others shook
heaven-defying
their heads helplessly.
transformations.
They
This
could only
stage
listen
was
to
very
the Great
important
Elder's
to him,
advice,
because
and
the 4
suppress the thought of
heaven-defying
rebelling.
transformations
In
was
the
a
vast
watershed.
palace, the
As
vital
long as
chi
he
was
could
like
step
water.
into the 4
The vital
heaven-defying
stones of heaven and
transformations,
earth were piled
his
up
entire
like
person
mountains.
would undergo
The terrifying
earth-shattering
vital chi
changes.
of heaven
Roar.
and earth surged
Yi
like
Xian
waves.
opened his mouth,
10 million
and the
vital
mountain of
stones of
primordial
heaven and
stones
earth were
turned
piled
to
up
dust.
there.
They
The
were all
endless
the
primordial
primordial
chi
chi
rushed
rushed towards
divine
him
dynasty
and was swallowed
and they
into
were
his
being
stomach.
devoured by
He
Yi began to frantically refine the primordial chi.
In the vital chi
One
ocean,
step,
the void twisted.
Yi Xian was only
Yi
one
Xian
step
was
away.
bathed in the vital
He didn't
chi
have the
ocean.
talent of
Large
Tai Tsung
amounts
and
of
Xiao.
vital stones of heaven
Therefore,
and earth were
he could
turned
only
into
rely
ashes.
on the primordial
The
stones
purest
to
vital
push
chi
his
kept pouring
cultivation
into
to the
Yi
four
Xian's head.
heaven-defying
Devour,
transformations.
refine, devour, and
The sea of
refine.
primordial chi
Yi Xian
completely
entered
drowned
an
Yi
extremely
Xian.
crazy
He
state
was
of
completely
cultivation.
immersed in
With
cultivation.
tens of millions
He
of
wouldn't
vital
come out
stones of
until
heaven
he
and
stepped
earth
into
for
the
him to
four
absorb.
heaven-defying
His
transformations.
cultivation grew at a
On the other
terrifying
side,
speed.
hundreds
Bang,
of flowers
bang,
bloomed.
and
Bang!
the fragrance of
Large
flowers
amounts
drifted.
of vital stones
Butterflies
of heaven
danced
and earth
among the
exploded.
flowers.
Surging
Xiao
vital
let out a
chi
bell
surged
like
toward
laughter
Yi
as
Xian.
she danced
Yi
among the
Xian
flowers.
did not reject it.
Xiao, you
He
are
did
so
not care
beautiful.
if he would explode.
Tai Tsung supported his
refining
chin
the
with
vital
one
chi
hand
crazily
and sat cross-legged in the grass.
Yi Xian
He stared
screamed
blankly
in his heart.
at Xiao
He had
dancing
already
among the
reached
flowers.
the peak of the
His
second
eyes were filled with
heaven-defying
adoration.
transformation.
He had
He was
fallen
only
for her.
one step
Tai
away from
Tsung
the
had
third
completely
heaven-defying
fallen for her.
transformation.
As a qualified bootlicker,
boom,
Tai Tsung could be
the
said to be a
mountain-like
bootlicker
yuan
to
was
the
turning
extreme.
into ashes.
If Yi Xian
The
saw
vital
Tai
chi
Tsung's
was being
current
devoured by
expression,
Yi Xian.
he was very
His
sure
body
that as long
swelled
as
like a
Xiao
rubber
said a
ball.
word,
The light
Tai
of the
Tsung would
burial
do
of
it
heaven
without
reincarnation
hesitation,
was extremely
even if it
dense.
meant certain death.
He had reached the
Second
critical
brother,
point of
is
the
this
third
nimble butterfly
heaven-defying
dance
transformation.
Xiao came in front of Tai Tsung like
it was
a
as if
spirit in the
ancient
wind
divine thunder
and
was
asked with a
exploding.
pure smile
It
on
was
her
as if the
face.
firmament and
It's
universe
nice.
were collapsing.
It's too nice.
Yi
If I
Xian
could
pushed
look
the
at you
burial
like
of
this for the
heaven
rest of my
reincarnation
life,
to the extreme.
I would be satisfied.
He broke through the shackles
Tai
of the
Tsung
third
laughed
heaven-defying
foolishly.
transformation
Second brother,
at a
you?
terrifying
Although
speed.
Xiao was
Buzz.
pure and innocent,
In the next
she was
moment,
not a fool.
Yi Xian's
On the
entire
contrary,
body trembled.
she was very smart.
Terrifying rays
After
of
all these years
reincarnation
together,
coiled around his
she
body,
could tell that Tai
and his
Tsung
entire
liked her.
body began to
However,
merge with the
Xiao could
heavens
not bear
and
to
earth.
hurt Tai Tsung.
A terrifying aura that caused one's heart to palpitate overflowed from his body. The third heaven-defying transformation. She was afraid that if she said no, Tai Tsung would be very sad. This was also the reason why Xiao suggested that the three of them become sworn brothers. She also called Tai Tsung her second brother. She wanted to let him know that she did not like him. But now, looking at Tai Tsung's infatuated eyes, Xiao knew that Tai Tsung still did not understand her feelings. This made her feel a bit conflicted. She did not know whether she should tell him or not. In Xiao's heart, there was no concept of good and evil. She just did not want to hurt her family. After all these years together, she really treated Tai Tsung as her big brother. She was afraid that if she said no, she would hurt Tai Tsung's heart deeply. Xiao, actually I rumble. Tai Chu was just about to speak when a terrifying roar came from within the valley. The terrifying yuan qi of heaven and earth leaked out, and the 100-flower valley was turned into ashes by the terrifying shockwave. It was completely scorched. This damn thing. Tai Tsung was originally immersed in his world with Xiao, and he wanted to use this opportunity to confess to Xiao. But this terrifying shockwave instantly interrupted his confession. The beautiful 100-flower valley was turned into scorched earth. This was simply a scene that ruined the scenery. Tai Tsung did not need to look to know who was behind this. Other than that evil Yi Zongtian, there could not be a third person here. Chapter 1889. Second brother, you're badmouthing me again. Whoosh. A cool breeze blew by as Yi Xian quietly appeared in front of the two of them. The aura on his body was calm, but it caused Tai Tsung and Xiao to be stunned. Big brother, you broke through? Xiao asked in surprise. Yes. Yi Xian smiled and nodded, admitting it. Tai Tsung snorted and said, what's so great about just reaching the fourth transformation? Your talent is too low. Second brother. Xiao frowned, and Tai Tsung's heart skipped a beat. He quickly put on a stiff face and apologized to Yi Xian. Big brother, please don't blame me. I was just joking. It's okay. You're my sworn brother after all. Yi Xian took the opportunity to pinch Tai Tsung's face, then fiercely pinched it. Tai Tsung was about to explode in anger, but when he saw Xiao's resentful gaze, he softened once more. It had to be said that Xiao really was Tai Tsung's nemesis. Just one look and one expression could make Tai Tsung lose his mind. Sigh. Yi Xian secretly sighed in his heart when he saw Tai Tsung's licking appearance. To be able to display licking to the extreme, Tai Tsung could be considered an outstanding person. But Yi Xian knew very well that Xiao didn't like him at all. This was a foreshadowing of future troubles. Second brother, I have something to ask big brother. Can you leave us alone? Xiao said. Tai Tsung was stunned. He looked at Yi Xian with jealousy, but he still nodded and disappeared. But before he left, he looked at Yi Xian with hostility. It was as if he was telling Yi Xian that Xiao belonged to him. If Yi Xian dared to have any ideas about her, he wouldn't let Yi Xian off. Yi Xian naturally understood the look in Tai Tsung's eyes before he left. However, He could only sigh in his heart because he was not interested in Xiao at all. Little sister, what do you want to ask me? Yi Xian looked at Xiao in confusion. Big brother, why do I feel like you've been avoiding me? As if you're trying to avoid meeting me alone? Xiao asked with a smile. Hiding from you? Yi Xian was stunned at first, but then he chuckled and said, Brother only cares about cultivation. Little sister, you misunderstand. Big brother, are you also cultivating so hard in order to prepare for the world-destroying tribulation? As a heaven-defying expert, Xiao naturally knew the mission of a heaven-defying expert. However, she felt that Yi Xian was somewhat different. He always gave her a mysterious feeling. Moreover, every time they talked about Yi Xian's background, Yi Xian would remain silent. This made Xiao even more curious about Yi Xian's identity. The world-destroying tribulation? Yi Xian smiled faintly. He did not answer this question, because he knew that the primeval era would be destroyed. No one would be able to break through the world-destroying tribulation. Not the primeval era, not the primeval era, not the primeval era, and not the primeval era. Only the future Chaos verse had a glimmer of hope, and he was preparing for this glimmer of hope. Of course, Yi Xian was not so great. He did not want to shoulder the responsibility of the eternal universe. He only wanted to do this for himself. Yi Xian was a selfish person. He only wanted to be above everything else, and even above the eternal universe. As for the life and death of others, it did not have much to do with him. Of course, the people he cared about were not included in this list. Big brother, you have a big secret in your heart, don't you? Xiao was very intelligent. Although Yi Xian did not answer her question, she could tell from the look on his face that Yi Xian's background was extraordinary. Is that important? Yi Xian smiled, then continued. Little sister, you didn't want to ask me this, did you? Of course not. Xiao shook her head. She bit her lip, as if hesitating about something. Then she fixed her gaze on Yi Xian and said, Big brother, I think you look like someone I know. Oh, Yi Xian's heart trembled, but his expression didn't change. He smiled and said, Little sister, who do you think I look like? The primeval era. Xiao spat out this single word. She looked at Yi Xian with shining eyes, as if to confirm whether or not she had guessed correctly. Unfortunately, Xiao was disappointed. Yi Xian's expression didn't change. Even the smile on his face was still there. The legendary #1 expert of the desolate era? Little sister, you really think too highly of me. How can I be famine? If I were him, how could I nearly die at the hands of the great Yin patriarch? Yi Xian pretended to be self-deprecating, but he was secretly alarmed. He never expected Xiao to associate him with famine. Impossible. I have never used the desolate heaven technique. This is also the only connection I have with my previous incarnation. Why would she suspect this? Yi Xian was extremely puzzled, but he could not figure out the reason. Although Yi Xian was extremely shocked, he maintained a calm expression. It was impossible to tell that he was affected. It looks like I guessed wrong. Legend has it that famine entered the door of samsara. How can Big Brother be him? Xiao said with a sigh. However, if Yi Xian were to observe carefully, he would realize that Xiao's eyes had never left Yi Xian. Clearly, she still had her suspicions. In fact, Xiao was not making a wild guess. It was a result of the bliss illusionary technique that she cultivated. This technique allowed the Tongtian to understand yin and yang. Her perception of things was extraordinary. Xiao could not sense that Yi Xian had the aura of a primordial being, but she could vaguely sense the existence of the desolate heaven technique. Therefore, she boldly guessed Yi Xian's identity. After all, legend had it that in the desolate era, only famine had survived and entered the door of samsara. However, at that moment, Xiao's guess was shaken. This was because Yi Xian's cultivation level was at the same heaven-defying 4 transformations as her. It was indeed impossible for him to be famine. However, this did not dispel her suspicions. Instead, she was even more interested in Yi Xian's identity. It looks like I've misunderstood Big Brother.
Big brother, please don't think too much about it. Xiao bowed at Yi Xian. It's fine, it's fine. Yi Xian pretended to be relaxed as he waved his hand. However, his opinion of Xiao had once again increased. As expected, to be able to become a woman who could shock the heavens and destroy the earth, she was definitely not a weak person. Xiao, are you done asking? Suddenly, Taitsong's voice sounded from the horizon. Clearly, he was displeased that Xiao was alone with Yi Xian. Upon hearing Taitsong's voice, Xiao smiled helplessly. She gave Yi Xian an apologetic look. Perhaps it was because his heart was throbbing, or perhaps it was because he could not bear to see what would happen in the future. But Yi Xian could not help but say something. Since you don't like him, why didn't you tell him earlier? The longer you delay it, the deeper the hurt will be. Just as Yi Xian said this, he immediately regretted it. He should not have spoken about such matters. Perhaps it might have changed things. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.